Don't touch that fence until you can prove you own the dirt under it. That was the first thing I said at 6:18 on a Tuesday morning, standing in work boots on my own property while a yellow excavator idled 17 feet inside my boundary line. Beep, beep, beep. The backup alarm punched through the cool morning air while diesel exhaust drifted between the oak trees and mixed with the smell of freshly torn soil. 20 yards behind the machine, 3 sections of my cedar fence were already lying flat in the grass. Orange survey stakes formed a straight line from the road towards Silver Pines Estates, each one topped with fluorescent ribbon snapping in the breeze. I knew exactly what those stakes meant. Somebody was building a road. The problem was, they were building it across my land. I walked toward the excavator, gravel grinding beneath my boots, when a white Lexus rolled onto the shoulder behind me. Vanessa Whitmore stepped out holding a stainless steel coffee cup in one hand and a rolled set of construction plans in the other. She wore a bright safety vest over clothes that had never been near an actual job site. "Ethan," she called, like we'd scheduled this. "You're interfering with an approved community improvement." I looked past her toward the machine. "Looks more like somebody's interfering with my fence." Her smile tightened. Vanessa was president of the Silver Pines HOA, a real estate broker, and the kind of person who could make trespassing sound like a neighborhood service. She unrolled the plans across the hood of her Lexus and tapped a thick blue line running across the eastern corner of my 11.5-acre property. "This is the new emergency access route," she said. "Silver Pines needs a second entrance. The board approved it Monday night." I stared at her. "Your board doesn't own my land. We have an easement." She said it quickly, confidently, like the word itself was a key that opened every gate in America. Then she slid a photocopied plat toward me. I expected to see my parcel highlighted. Instead, something in the lower corner caught my eye. A sequence of numbers. Small print. Easy to miss unless you'd spent 20 years reading. Grading plans, drainage maps, and property surveys for a living. I leaned closer. Vanessa mistook my silence for surrender. "The contractor has a schedule, Ethan. If you delay construction, the association may hold you responsible for additional costs." The excavator kept idling behind us. Beep, beep, beep. I could smell hot hydraulic fluid now. One of the orange ribbons slapped against a wooden stake beside my boot. But I wasn't looking at the proposed second entrance anymore. I was looking at the parcel number printed beside the existing entrance to Silver Pines, the road Vanessa used every morning, the road more than 200 homeowners believed belonged to their subdivision. I recognized that number. I'd seen it before, years earlier, inside the old deed binder that came with my property. I folded the map once and handed it back to her. "Vanessa," I said, "are you absolutely sure this is your second entrance?" She gave me that polished smile again. "Of course." I nodded and looked toward the main gate in the distance. That was when I stopped worrying about the land she was trying to take, because Vanessa had just handed me the first clue that Silver Pines had a much bigger problem with the entrance they already had. 6 years earlier, that same stretch of ground had been the reason Rachel and I bought the place. I was 43 then, tired of subdivisions, tired of hearing lawn crews at 7 every Saturday morning, and tired of paying for space I could barely use. I had spent most of my adult life as a site contractor, grading commercial lots, building drainage systems, laying private roads, and fixing expensive mistakes made by people who thought property lines were suggestions. When I found 11 6/10 acres bordering Silver Pines Estates, I knew what I was looking at before the real estate agent finished her pitch. The house was modest, but there was room for my workshop, a stand of mature oaks along the eastern boundary, and enough distance from the subdivision that Rachel could drink coffee on the back porch without staring into somebody else's kitchen. The seller was Walter Briggs, 72 years old, sunbrowned from decades. Outdoors, with silver hair and hands that looked permanently shaped around fence pliers. His family had owned nearly 200 acres there before developers began buying pieces of it in the 1990s. Walter walked the property with me himself. I still remember the dry grass brushing my jeans and the metallic click of his tape measure closing after he checked one of the old survey monuments. He stopped near a weathered iron pin half buried beside an oak tree and tapped it with his boot. "Never trust a fence to tell you where your land ends," he said, "and never assume a road belongs to the people driving on it." I laughed because I thought he was giving me old rancher wisdom. Walter did not laugh. At closing, he handed me a thick brown deed binder held together with two cracked rubber bands. Inside were surveys, plats, tax maps, handwritten notes, and copies of agreements dating back decades. I kept everything. That is what contractors do. You learn quickly that the boring piece of paper nobody wants to read is usually the one everybody desperately needs 5 years later. One page caught my attention that first night. It showed my property beside the original Silver Pines development, except there was a narrow triangular parcel near what eventually became their main entrance. The shape made no practical sense. It was too small for a house and too awkward for farming. I asked Walter about it the next morning while he was helping me identify the old boundary markers. He stared toward the subdivision entrance for a few seconds, then smiled. "Leave that one alone," he said. "Someday somebody will explain it to themselves." I assumed it was another Walter saying and forgot about it. The binder went onto the bottom shelf of a steel cabinet in my workshop. Rachel and I settled in. I rebuilt the fence, resurfaced the gravel drive, cleaned out the drainage ditch, and turned an old equipment shed into the workshop I had wanted for years. Silver Pine stayed on its side of the trees, and I stayed on mine. For almost 6 years, that arrangement worked perfectly. Then Vanessa Whitmore decided 200 homeowners needed another way in and out, and the strange little triangle Walter had warned me about suddenly stopped looking meaningless. Vanessa Whitmore first came to my property on a Thursday afternoon in late April, 6 weeks before the excavator showed up. I heard tires crunching over the gravel before I saw her white Lexus stop beside my workshop. She stepped out carrying a leather folder and wearing the kind of polished smile real estate people practice until it becomes muscle memory. At that point, I had no reason to dislike her. Silver Pines had grown fast over the previous 3 years, and Vanessa had recently become president of its homeowners association after serving 2 terms on the board. She introduced herself, complimented the property, admired the oak trees, and spent 5 minutes talking about traffic like we were 2 neighbors solving a shared problem. According to her, Silver Pines now had 214 homes feeding through one entrance on a County Road 12. School mornings were backed up. Delivery trucks clogged the gate. Residents complained about waiting several minutes just to leave the neighborhood. I understood the problem. What I did not understand was why Vanessa thought it belonged to me. She opened her folder across the hood of her Lexus and showed me a glossy development map. A blue line crossed the eastern corner of my land, connected to a planned internal street, then continued toward the county road. "We only need about 8/10 of an acre," she said. "The association is prepared to make you a fair offer." Fair turned out to mean $18,000. I looked at the map again. The proposed road would cut through my tree line, pass less than 60 feet from my workshop, and turn the quietest section of my property into a daily route for hundreds of vehicles. I slid the paper back toward her. "I'm not interested." Her smile stayed in place, but something behind it changed. "You have not heard the full proposal." I heard enough. She explained that a second entrance would improve emergency access, reduce congestion, and increase property values throughout Silver Pines. I told her those might all be good reasons for Silver Pines to build a road on Silver Pines property. She tapped one manicured finger against the blue line. "This is the most practical route. For you," I said. The afternoon breeze moved through the oaks above us, carrying the smell of fresh sawdust from my workshop. Somewhere beyond the trees, a lawn mower droned inside the subdivision. Vanessa closed the folder slowly. "You are one property owner standing in the way of more than 200 families." That sentence told me more about her than the previous 20 minutes had. She did not see my land as something I owned. She saw it as an obstacle her board had not removed yet. "I am not one of your homeowners, Vanessa." Her expression hardened for half a second before the professional smile returned. "There may already be access rights attached to this property. I would hate for this to become unnecessarily complicated." I had spent 20 years around developers, survey crews, county inspectors, and construction attorneys. People with legitimate rights usually showed you the documents before threatening you with them. "Then send me whatever you have," I said. Vanessa climbed back into her Lexus without another word. 3 business days later, a certified envelope arrived. The paper inside smelled like fresh toner. Across the top, in bold letters, were 3 words that changed the entire conversation: notice of easement rights. The notice looked official enough to make most people nervous. Heavy paper. Association letterhead. A law firm name printed beneath Vanessa's signature. It claimed Silver Pines possessed a historical access easement across the eastern edge of my property and intended to exercise that right for public safety improvements. I read it twice at the kitchen table, while Rachel stood beside me with her coffee going cold. Then I read the legal description. It was dense, full of bearings, distances, references to old plats, and enough formal language to make a simple strip of dirt sound like federal territory. What bothered me was not what it said. It was what it did not show. There was no attached recorded easement, no original agreement, no signature from Walter, just a reference number and a declaration that the board considered. The matter settled. I called the county planning office the next morning. The woman there confirmed that Silver Pines had submitted preliminary plans for an emergency access connection, but she also made something clear. County review did not settle private ownership disputes. That responsibility belonged to the applicant. Vanessa had apparently treated that distinction like a green light. Within a week, orange survey stakes appeared along my tree line. I pulled one from the ground, photographed the location, then put it back exactly where I found it. 2 days later, I received another letter warning me not to interfere with authorized surveying activity. Then came the homeowners association meeting. Vanessa invited me personally, which should have been my first clue that she wanted an audience. The clubhouse smelled like lemon cleaner and burnt coffee. Nearly 70 residents filled folding chairs while Vanessa stood beside a projection screen showing traffic maps and emergency response diagrams. She described the second entrance as essential. Then she described me as the problem. Unfortunately, she said, one neighboring landowner has refused reasonable cooperation. Heads turned toward me. I stayed seated. Vanessa continued, talking about children on school buses, emergency vehicles, and community safety. Every sentence made my refusal sound less like a property dispute and more like a moral failure. When she finally asked whether I wanted to explain myself, I stood. Show everyone the recorded easement. The room went quiet. Vanessa blinked. Our council has already verified our rights. Then put the document on the screen. She did not. Instead, she said legal materials were too technical for a public meeting. That was when I knew the pressure campaign was doing work the paperwork could not. The following Monday, I came home to find yellow paint on 3 oak trees and fresh flags running toward my fence. Wednesday brought a contractor trailer. Thursday brought a portable sign announcing future road improvements. Friday morning, Rachel called me while I was inspecting a drainage job 15 miles away. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear machinery. Behind her, Ethan, you need to come home. I was in my truck before she finished the sentence. When I turned onto our gravel drive 20 minutes later, the smell reached me first. Diesel, cut cedar, fresh dirt. 3 sections of my fence were down, and an excavator was sitting inside my property. Vanessa stood beside it holding rolled plans like she had been waiting for me. A county permit number was displayed on the contractor's windshield. For the first time, she had something that looked like momentum. I walked past her, past the fallen fence, and toward the nearest orange stake. Then I noticed the photocopied plat in her hand. One tiny number in the corner looked strangely familiar. That evening, the brown deed binder came off the bottom shelf for the first time in years. I carried it into the kitchen and dropped it beside Vanessa's notice, sending a thin cloud of dust across the table. Rachel opened the windows while I spread survey plats, tax maps, and recorded descriptions beneath the pendant light. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator humming and the occasional scrape of paper against wood. My coffee went cold before I touched it. I started with the easement reference from Vanessa's letter. Numbers do not care who sits on a homeowners association board. They either match or they do not. I traced the bearings from the county road, followed the distances across an old development plat, and stopped. Then I did it again. Same result. The easement ended before my eastern boundary. Not close. Not ambiguous. It simply did not cross the 8/10 of an acre Vanessa wanted. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Rachel saw my face. What? She asked. I turned the plat toward her. They referenced the wrong parcel. She looked relieved. I was not. Something still bothered me. Vanessa's photocopied construction map had used that same parcel number beside the existing Silver Pines entrance. I pulled out Walter's oldest survey and found the narrow triangular piece I had noticed 6 years earlier. There it was. Same shape, same location, different generation of paperwork, but the identifying number traced back to the same strip of ground. I felt That familiar tightening in my chest that comes when a grading plan suddenly explains why water keeps flowing somewhere it should not. One mistake had revealed another system underneath it. I opened my laptop and searched the county recorder index using Walter Briggs as the grantor. Old transfers appeared one after another as his family sold acreage to developers. Then I found a recorded access agreement from the original Silver Pines project. The scanned copy was faded enough that I had to enlarge it twice. I read the first page, then the second. Construction access. Temporary roadway use. Maintenance obligations. Nothing in the language looked like the clean, unrestricted ownership Vanessa had been claiming. I was careful not to celebrate. Old property records can hide amendments, renewals, releases, and documents recorded under different names. 20 years in construction had taught me that finding one favorable sheet of paper does not mean you understand the whole file. So I kept digging. Near midnight, rain began tapping against the kitchen windows. Rachel brought me another cup of coffee and rested her hand on the back of my chair. "Are we okay?" she asked. "On our land?" "I think so. And their road." I looked toward the dark tree line beyond the window. Somewhere behind those trees was the main Silver Pines entrance, still carrying cars beneath decorative stone columns, as if nothing had changed. I do not know yet. At 12:43 in the morning, I found Walter's name again on an older plat attached to the triangular parcel. This time there was a handwritten notation beside the entrance corridor referencing retained underlying title. I stopped breathing for about 2 seconds. Then I reached for my phone. I did not call Vanessa. I called Walter. He answered on the 5th ring, sounding half asleep. "Ethan, sorry about the hour. I need to ask you about the Silver Pines entrance." Silence filled the line. Then Walter exhaled slowly. "So," he said, "somebody finally explained it to themselves." Walter was quiet for several seconds, and I could hear an old ceiling fan clicking somewhere behind him. Then his voice sharpened. "Do you still have the binder?" I looked at the papers covering my kitchen table. "Every page." "Good. Do not close anything. Do not block that road. And do not tell that woman what you found." That was not the answer I expected. Walter explained that when the original Silver Pines developer bought acreage from his family, they needed temporary access for construction equipment before the subdivision connected fully to County Road 12. Walter had signed an agreement allowing roadway use across a narrow strip his family still controlled. Later documents were supposed to settle permanent access, but Walter remembered arguments over maintenance, drainage, and ownership. "I never signed away that ground outright," he said. "But memory is not a deed, Ethan. Get somebody qualified to trace it." By 8:30 the next morning, I was sitting across from Claire Bennett, a property attorney whose office smelled like coffee and old paper. I brought the entire binder. Claire did not smile when I explained what Vanessa had done. She simply put on reading glasses and started making a list. First, chain of title. Second, recorded easements. Third, amendments. Fourth, current survey. "We prove your boundary first," she said. "Then we worry about their entrance." I liked her immediately. By noon, Daniel Mercer, a licensed surveyor I had worked with on commercial projects, was walking my eastern line with a receiver pole and field tablet. The electronic equipment chirped every few seconds while Daniel checked monuments against recorded coordinates. Fresh orange flags from Vanessa's crew stood nearby. Daniel measured one, looked at his screen, then looked at me. "They are inside your parcel." "How far?" "At this point, 17 feet. There was that number again. By sunset, we had enough to demand that work stop on my land, but Claire still would not let me touch the existing Silver Pines entrance. Rachel asked the obvious question that night. "If Walter still owns something under their road, can we close the gate?" I shook my head. "No. Even after they tore down our fence. Especially now." I spread the documents across the table. "We know what they do not have over here. We still need to know exactly what exists over there." The next 4 days moved slowly. Title records arrived. Old plats were pulled from archives. Claire found a maintenance agreement. Daniel found a later survey. Walter drove over with a cardboard file box from his garage that smelled faintly of dust and machine oil. Piece by piece, the history became clearer. Silver Pines had legitimate access interests, but the underlying land and the scope of those rights were not what Vanessa had represented. That distinction mattered a lot. On Friday afternoon, Claire placed 2 folders on her desk. One was labeled East Boundary. The other was labeled Main Access. She tapped the first. This one stops their new road. Then she tapped the second. This one is leverage, but only if we handle it correctly. I thought about Vanessa standing beside that excavator, warning me about construction delays. So what do? Claire leaned back. Nothing dramatic. We document. We notify. And we let her keep talking. That was when I understood the strategy. Vanessa believed silence meant weakness. Fine. I could be quiet. Because every time she put her version of ownership in writing, she was building a record we would not have to build for her. Vanessa gave us exactly what Claire expected. Monday morning, an email arrived demanding reimbursement for $12,400 in contractor delays, survey expenses, and what she called unnecessary administrative costs. Claire told me not to argue. I replied with one question. Please identify the recorded instrument granting Silver Pines permanent access across my eastern parcel. Vanessa answered 40 minutes later. Her response was 3 paragraphs long and twice as confident as it needed to be. She cited the same easement reference we had already traced to land outside my boundary. Then she added something better. She wrote that Silver Pines possessed permanent, unrestricted access rights over all historical entrance corridors serving the subdivision. I forwarded the email to Claire. Her response was 4 words. Save the original message. So I did. Every email, every certified letter, every map, every photograph. I kept them in a folder, beside Walter's old records while Daniel completed the new survey. 2 days later, Vanessa sent another notice claiming the association could place a lien against my property for costs created by my refusal to cooperate. Claire answered that one herself, requesting the exact covenant Vanessa believed gave an association I had never joined authority to assess my land. Vanessa never produced one. Instead, she scheduled construction to resume Thursday morning. That told me everything. She was done proving her rights. She intended to act like she had them. At 7:12 Thursday morning, I heard diesel engines coming up the county road. Rachel stood at the kitchen window while I pulled on my boots. Is this it? She asked. This is the part where everybody has to follow the paperwork. Outside, morning dew still covered the grass. A dump truck waited on the shoulder while the same yellow excavator rolled toward the opening where my fence had been removed. Vanessa arrived 5 minutes later. White Lexus, stainless steel coffee cup, rolled plans. Same performance. Ethan, she said, you were notified that work would resume. I was. The contractor foreman climbed down from his truck and looked between us. I knew him by sight from other county jobs. His name was Mike Dalton. He looked uncomfortable before anyone said a word. Vanessa pointed toward the orange stakes. You can proceed. Mike reached for his radio. Before you do, I said, you should read this. I handed him a document Claire had obtained that morning after Daniel's sealed survey and supporting ownership records were submitted. It was a county stop work notice covering construction activity on the disputed eastern parcel pending correction of the access documentation. Mike read the first page, then the second. The machinery behind him stayed silent. Vanessa stepped closer. That does not override our easement. I kept my hands in my jacket pockets. Then send the county the recorded easement they asked for. Her jaw tightened. Our legal rights are established. Which rights? I asked. The rights over this entrance, or all historical entrance corridors? She hesitated. Only for a second. All of them. Silver Pines has permanent unrestricted access. We have for decades. Mike looked away. I could almost hear Claire's voice telling me not to interrupt. Let her talk. So I nodded. Can you put that in writing? Vanessa gave a small laugh. I already did. She was right. That afternoon, Claire printed Vanessa's email and placed it in the main access folder. Daniel's survey went underneath it. Walter's agreement followed. Then the historical plat. Then the title report. The stack was barely an inch thick, but it carried more weight than every threat Vanessa had mailed me. The next county hearing was scheduled for Tuesday. Vanessa thought she was going there to restart construction. I knew because she said so in another email. What she did not know was that Claire had requested review of the legal description Vanessa herself had placed into the record, and that description did not end at my eastern fence. It ran straight back to the road beneath the stone columns at the main entrance of Silver Pines. Tuesday morning, the county hearing room smelled like old carpet, printer toner, and coffee that had been sitting on a warmer too long. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes after Claire and me with 2 Silver Pines board members and an attorney carrying a polished leather briefcase. She looked relaxed. That told me she still believed the only question in the room was whether her contractor could restart work across my eastern boundary. Claire had 2 folders on the table in front of her. East boundary sat on top. Main access stayed underneath. She had told me in the parking lot not to mention the second folder unless Vanessa opened that door herself. Let the documents do the work, she said. The hearing officer began with the proposed emergency road. Vanessa's attorney talked about traffic congestion, emergency response times, historical access, and the association's good faith reliance on county planning documents. He made 8/10 of an acre sound like an administrative detail instead of part of somebody else's property. Claire waited until he finished. Then she handed Daniel's sealed survey to the hearing officer. The referenced easement does not cross Mr. Cole's parcel, she said. Daniel stepped forward and explained the measurements in language nobody needed a surveying license to understand. The easement Vanessa had repeatedly cited stopped outside my property. The construction stakes continued beyond that line. At the deepest point, they were 17 feet inside my parcel. The hearing officer looked toward Vanessa's attorney. Do you have another recorded instrument granting Silver Pines access across Mr. Cole's land? Papers moved across the table. Vanessa whispered something. Her attorney checked his briefcase. Then he checked the documents already in front of him. Not with us today. Claire nodded. Then there is currently no documented basis before this office for construction across my client's property. The stop work order remained in effect. The excavator would stay parked. The fence would be restored. Any future attempt to build the second entrance would require a valid agreement with me or some other lawful basis. That should have ended the hearing. I was ready to leave. Vanessa was not. She leaned toward her attorney, but he shook his head slightly. She ignored him. This is being made unnecessarily complicated, she said. The hearing officer looked at her. Ms. Whitmore, your association submitted the access claim. Because Silver Pines has historical access rights throughout these corridors, we have used them for decades. Claire did not move. Vanessa continued. Our rights are permanent and unrestricted. That includes the historical entrance corridors serving the development. Her attorney touched her sleeve. She pulled away. I looked at Claire. Her hand moved to the second folder. Ms. Whitmore, Claire said, just so the record is clear, are you representing on behalf of Silver Pines that the association possesses permanent and unrestricted rights over all historical entrance corridors associated with the development? Vanessa looked directly at her. Yes, including the existing main entrance. Of course. Claire paused. Thank you. She moved the east boundary folder aside. Vanessa's attorney stopped writing. Claire placed main access in front of the hearing officer. Then we need to address a second discrepancy created by the association's filing. Vanessa frowned. Claire opened Walter's original agreement first, then the historical plat, then the later survey, then the title report. Finally, she placed Vanessa's own email on top. The hearing officer began reading. Nobody spoke. I could hear the ventilation system humming above us. Vanessa's attorney leaned toward the documents. His face changed before Vanessa's did. Claire pointed to the triangular parcel beside the main Silver Pines entrance. The association has legitimate access interests here. We are not disputing that residents have been using this road. But Ms. Whitmore has repeatedly represented those rights as permanent, unrestricted control over the corridor. The recorded documents do not say that. Vanessa interrupted. We have used that entrance for decades. Claire looked at her. Use and ownership are not the same thing. Then she turned the historical plat toward the hearing officer. And there is another problem. She placed one finger beside the narrow triangular parcel. The underlying title history for the land beneath part of the existing entrance does not run the way Silver Pines represented it in its filings. Vanessa stared at the map. That is impossible. Claire did not raise her voice. Then you may want to explain why the land beneath your only entrance was never conveyed to Silver Pines the way you have been claiming. Nobody moved. The sentence landed harder because Claire did not dramatize it. Vanessa's attorney immediately pulled the plat toward himself. He traced the parcel line with one finger, checked Walter's agreement, then turned several pages of the title report. We need a moment, he said. The hearing officer gave him one. Vanessa whispered urgently, but her attorney barely responded. He was reading now. Really reading. The same thing Vanessa should have done before an excavator crossed my fence. Claire continued when the hearing resumed. To be clear, Mr. Cole is not asking this office to close the Silver Pines entrance. More than 200 families depend on that road, and they are not responsible for this dispute. We are asking for accurate documentation. Silver Pines cannot claim unlimited historical access when it wants to cross Mr. Cole's property, then rely on a narrower interpretation of those same historical documents when discussing its existing entrance. The hearing officer nodded slowly. That was the heart of it. Vanessa had tried to stretch old access language wide enough to reach my land. In doing so, she had forced everyone to examine what that language actually meant at the road Silver Pines already depended on. The county ordered the proposed eastern construction to remain suspended. It also required Silver Pines to correct its representations regarding the existing corridor and resolve the documentation governing its main access before relying on those claimed historical rights for any future expansion. Nobody chained a gate. Nobody stranded a family. Nobody needed to. Vanessa had walked into the room expecting permission for a second entrance and walked out needing lawyers to clarify the first. Outside the hearing room, Claire closed both folders. "You know what the best part is?" she asked. "What?" "We never raised the main entrance." I looked through the glass doors toward Vanessa, standing beside her attorney. "She did." Claire smiled. "Exactly. My phone buzzed before we reached the parking lot." Silver Pines had issued an emergency notice to its homeowners. The proposed second entrance was suspended. The association's existing access documentation was under legal review. I read it twice. Across the parking lot, Vanessa stood beside her white Lexus, staring at her phone. 6 weeks earlier, she had come to my workshop offering $18,000 for 0.8 of an acre. When I said no, she threatened easements. When that failed, she brought survey stakes, then contractors, then an excavator. She thought enough confidence could turn somebody else's property into a community road. Instead, one wrong parcel number had led us backward through 30 years of records to the road beneath the stone columns she drove through every morning. She wanted a second entrance. She had just forced everyone to ask what rights Silver Pines actually had over the first. The first thing that disappeared was the orange ribbon. 3 days after the hearing, a contractor returned to my property. This time he carried Daniel's sealed survey instead of Vanessa's construction plan. The same yellow excavator came rumbling across the gravel, but its bucket was not cutting a road. It was filling the shallow grading work it had started. Fresh soil went back where it belonged. Damaged fence posts were replaced. The 3 oak trees marked with yellow paint stayed standing. Rachel stood beside me with her coffee while the last machine backed toward the county road. Beep, beep, beep. The same sound that had opened the story now faded into the distance. "That sounds better," she said. She was right. Silence has a different sound when somebody tried to take it from you. Silver Pines had a much louder week. Once homeowners learned why the second entrance had been stopped, questions started coming faster than Vanessa could answer them. Why had the association spent money on contractors before verifying access? Why had residents been told Silver Pines possessed unrestricted rights? Why had Vanessa threatened a neighboring property owner with construction costs when the easement she cited did not cross his land? And now the question nobody had expected. What exactly governed the road all 214 homes were already using? An emergency board meeting filled the clubhouse beyond capacity. I did not attend. I did not need a front row seat to Vanessa's humiliation. This had never been about humiliating her. Walter called me afterward. One of his old neighbors had attended. Vanessa was removed as president by board action pending a membership vote. Less than 2 weeks later, she resigned from the board entirely. Silver Pines hired independent property counsel to straighten out the main entrance documentation. The process took months because real property problems do not disappear with one dramatic speech in a hearing room. Old agreements had to be reviewed. Maintenance obligations had to be clarified. Drainage responsibilities had to be defined. The underlying parcel history had to be reconciled with how the road had actually been used for decades. In the end, nobody lost practical access to their home. That mattered to me more than any revenge ending could have. 214 families had not torn down my fence. They had not planted survey stakes on my land. They had not driven an excavator 17 feet across my boundary. Making them suffer would not have proven I was right. It would only have made me cruel. Silver Pines eventually negotiated properly defined access documentation covering the existing entrance, including maintenance responsibilities, drainage, and the exact scope of roadway use. The proposed second road across my eastern acreage disappeared from every revised development map. The association paid for restoration of the disturbed portion of my property and the survey costs directly connected to correcting the boundary problem. No road crossed my oak trees. No neighborhood traffic passed 60 feet from my workshop. And nobody from Silver Pines ever again told me their board vote could decide what happened on my land. Walter came by the afternoon the final documents were recorded. We walked toward the rebuilt eastern fence beneath the same oak trees Vanessa had marked for removal. Near one of the new posts, I spotted an orange survey stake lying in the grass. Its fluorescent ribbon had faded from weeks of rain and sunlight. I picked it up. Walter smiled. Keeping a souvenir? I looked at the stake for a second. No, I tossed it into the bed of my truck. I have enough paperwork. Walter laughed. Then he walked toward the old iron boundary pin he had shown me 6 years earlier and tapped it with his boot. Remember what I told you? I did. Never trust a fence to tell you where your land ends. And never assume a road belongs to the people driving on it. A few weeks later, I had a meeting with a client who lived inside Silver Pines. I drove toward the main entrance for the first time since the hearing. The decorative stone columns still stood exactly where they always had. Cars moved through normally. A school bus waited near the gate. A woman pushing a stroller waved at a neighbor. Nothing looked dramatic. That was the best part. No chains. No barricades. No line of angry homeowners. No sign announcing that I had won. Just a road backed by paperwork that finally described what people actually had the right to use. I slowed for a moment beneath the stone columns. 6 weeks earlier, Vanessa had stood beside an excavator and warned me that delaying her second entrance might cost me money. She had believed my property line was the problem. It was not. The problem was that she had never bothered to understand the documents she was using to cross it. She tried to stretch an old easement far enough to take 8/10 of an acre from me. Instead, she stretched it far enough that everyone started examining the road Silver Pines already depended on. I never locked their gate. I never wanted to. I did not need to take their entrance away to prove they could not take mine. That distinction mattered. When I reached home that afternoon, Rachel was sitting on the back porch with 2 cups of coffee. The oaks moved gently above the rebuilt fence. My workshop sat exactly where it had always been, quiet and undisturbed. I joined her and looked toward the eastern property line. You know, she said, for someone who wanted another road, Vanessa created a lot of paperwork. I laughed. Wrong dirt will do that. The sun dropped behind the trees, throwing long shadows across the grass where the excavator had once sat. Within another season, even those marks would disappear. But I knew I would remember the sound of that machine at 6:18 on a Tuesday morning. Beep, beep, beep. I would remember Vanessa unrolling that map across her Lexus and telling me the board had already approved everything. Most of all, I would remember the tiny parcel number in the corner that she never expected me to notice. Vanessa thought the biggest piece of leverage in the dispute was the excavator sitting on my property. She was wrong. It was a number printed in small type on her own map. For years, she had treated ownership like something a board could create with a vote, expensive letterhead, and enough confidence. But property lines do not care how confident you are. Neither do deeds. Neither do surveys. Sometimes justice sounds like heavy machinery starting before sunrise. Sometimes it sounds like a hearing officer turning pages in a silent room. And sometimes it is nothing more dramatic than an attorney sliding a second folder across a table and asking one question. If Silver Pines owns every historical entrance corridor, why was the land beneath your only entrance never conveyed to you? Vanessa wanted my land for a second entrance. In the end, she never got 1 inch of it. And by trying to take it, she forced her own association to prove exactly what rights it had over the entrance it already used. Justice did not need a locked gate. It did not need revenge. It only needed the right map, the right records, and enough patience to let Vanessa keep talking. If this story had you rooting for Ethan, hit the like button and share this video with someone who believes property rights should still mean something when an HOA crosses the line. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about ordinary homeowners who refuse to be intimidated when someone tries to take control of what legally belongs to them. And before you go, leave a comment below and tell me, what would you have done if an HOA sent an excavator 17 feet onto your property and started tearing down your fence? I read the comments, and I would love to hear what you think. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for supporting the channel, and I will see you in the next story.